I finally figured it out. This channel is getting a new name, a new direction, and a much bigger and new vision for where we are going. This is exciting news, at least for me. Now, before we get into it, I want to say thank you to all of the subscribers who have been supporting me over the last year. At the time of this recording, we are almost at 3,400 subscribers, which is awesome. And I want to say thank you very much to each and every one of you. I really have appreciated your support. Now, over the course of the last year or so, as I have been building this channel, I recognize that this channel has had a bit of an identity crisis. Meaning we don't really know what this channel is about. I don't even know what this channel is about. And that's not a great place to be, especially in the YouTube algorithm. You see, when this channel first began, I was planning to talk about my chronic illness and how I was going through that from a Christian perspective and how my faith was influencing that. And if you go back to the very beginning of this channel, you'll even see like an interview I did with a close friend who she's had a long battle with Lyme disease, and I talked about her and her experience and let her share her story. And so this channel started in a very different place. It was basically the Christian version of my other channel called Fitness with an Illness. That channel was exclusively, and still is, all about my chronic illness, me walking through it, learning to try to boost my health naturally. That was the focus of that. But the way I built it and the audience I started with was lots of family and friends, and it didn't really start out in a Christian place per se. Not that it was anything bad, but just that wasn't the intent. And so I had built Faith Made Well as basically the Christian version of that. Now, what I kind of kept running into is that I'm basically doing the same thing from two sides of one coin, and that didn't really feel right. So I started in this place of chronic illness, and then it evolved into I was reading each chapter of the Bible, and I was putting stock footage over that, and then there were some issues with that in terms of like copyright because the Bible is copyrighted and all that stuff. And then we kind of got into just random faith discussions and theology, and I enjoyed all that, but I don't necessarily feel like I'm the most equipped at all times to cover that stuff. All that to say, well, and then on top of that, a lot of my subscribers have actually come from my shorts and my reels, from just me reading Bible verses and throwing them up on YouTube. That's where a lot of my subscribers have come from. And so my subscribers on this channel are coming from all these different places, and no one really knows what we're supposed to be doing here. And that's a problem. And so the last little while, I've been messing around with a couple videos where I've been talking about Lord of the Rings. And it is the first time in this channel's lifespan where I have had unprompted requests for more videos like that, which was very cool. I didn't know if there was going to be a whole lot of interest in that, but in terms of views, they've done pretty good on the channel compared to other stuff. And there's been just more interest, more comments, and that's exciting to me. And so, through lots of prayer and wrestling over the last few months, I've come to the decision that we are going to be renaming this channel Faith, Fables, and Fellowship, with the intent of this channel covering all things fantasy. Now, initially, we're going to start a lot with Christian fantasy, and we're going to cover things like Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis, and the Wingfeather Saga, which I found a couple years ago. It was gifted to me. Right there with those three books alone, there's enough, or those three series alone, sorry, there's enough content to last me a long time. There are people who only cover Lord of the Rings on their channel, and they have been doing it for a decade, because there's so much to talk about in Lord of the Rings. So, there's a lot to cover. But I also wouldn't mind going into some secular fantasy as well and trying to find Christian themes in those books as well. A couple years ago, I finally read some of Brandon Sanderson's stuff and some of the Stormlight archives. I read The Way of Kings, which I really enjoyed once I got past the first 600 pages. That's a conversation for another day. But, Brandon Sanderson is great. I am a big fan of Gregor the Overlander, which I know not many people have heard of. But if you've heard of the Hunger Games, Gregor the Overlander was written by the same author, Suzanne Collins. She wrote this long before Hunger Games was a thing, and it's basically kind of a modern fantasy twist. This kid named Gregor falls down into the underworld, and basically uh, it's full on fantasy at that point. But the setting, the time period, is technically the modern world. But that's a great series I love. And there's so much out there in the world of fantasy. It's a sea of endless material, basically. And so I'd love to dive into all that. And the main goal, yes, is going to be looking at these books from a Christian perspective, because I believe, and Tolkien, the grandfather of fantasy, strongly believed that all stories point us back to Christ. Also, make sure and stay tuned till the end of the video, where I'm going to talk about something I have been working on personally for many years, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Stay tuned. Because within the gospel story, you have everything that the human heart desires. There is love, there is resurrection, there is new hope, everything being made new and made right in the end. The restoration, I mean, just everything that you love about your favorite movie, your favorite book, everything in it is taken right from the gospel story. And Tolkien strongly believed that fairy tales, that fantasy, fiction in general, it gave us a fleeting glimpse of what Christ will one day do when he comes back and restores this world and makes a new heaven and a new earth, and all things are made right. That happy ever after is a real thing. It's just, it's not what we think it is. It's bigger and better than we could ever imagine. That the happy ever after we read about in books is the tiniest little fraction of what that will be when Christ makes all things new. We just get this quick, like the window shutter opens and it closes. That's like what reading a fantasy book is like. It gives you just this brief glimpse of, oh, that's what we're waiting for, is that day where everything is made right, where good finally triumphs over evil, where there's no more death, no more sorrow, no more war, and we all long for that. And C.S. Lewis, in a similar manner, described it like this. C.S. Lewis said that there are certain desires within our human nature, and those desires always have something to fulfill them. For example, if you are hungry, there is such a thing as food. If you are thirsty, there is such a thing as water. But the point that C.S. Lewis is making is that the desires within us, there is always a solution or a satisfaction of those desires, even if it is in a temporary sense. Because the ultimate fulfillment of those desires is in Christ. But what he is getting at is that if our soul longs for a world where everything is right, where there's no more death, where we don't lose our loved ones, where children don't go hungry, where there's no more war and famine, if we can feel it deep within ourselves that this world is not right because of those things, then logically that must mean that that world exists somewhere because we desire it. Because if this world was able to satisfy us, we wouldn't be desiring something else. It is those elements of fantasy that Tolkien and Lewis believed pointed us back to Jesus Christ, the ultimate fulfillment of those desires, the only one who could ultimately become everything that we need, the only one who could satisfy every desire, the only one who can make everything right. I am a strong believer that fantasy is one of the most beautiful literary genres to ever be created. And we have Tolkien and Lewis to be grateful to for that. And so that's where this channel is heading, as we are going to be discussing faith in fables and fantasy. And my goal is to make this be a community where we can come alongside each other and enjoy this conversation and point each other back to Christ. And my hope, too, is that maybe because of the fantasy, because people will search for things like Lord of the Rings or Narnia, my hope is that perhaps some of my videos will reach people who don't know Jesus. And maybe we can help get that conversation started with them and get their faith ignited, and get them curious and interested about Jesus by talking about stupid things like dragons and dwarves, And I believe God can use anything to reach someone. For crying out loud, God used a talking donkey to basically smack Balaam in the face, knock him off his donkey, and be like, "Dude, you're going off the wrong path. You're about to walk into an angel who's gonna, destroy you, and your donkey has to actually like stop and start talking." And yes, I believe this actually happened. I believe God made a donkey talk to speak to a specific person. If you don't know this story, please go back and read it. It's in the Old Testament. I apologize if I forget where exactly. I'll leave it down here below. I want to say First Samuel, but that might be wrong. Anyway, fantasy is amazing, and there's so much to talk about. The Lord of the Rings alone, there are so many deep characters and rich stories to cover that all point us back to Jesus. Now, I know that many Christians are sometimes kind of put off by fantasy, and there are many Christians who don't like Tolkien and Lewis, specifically because they don't like the aspect of magic within their worlds. Now, I think if you were to take the time and to study Tolkien and Lewis and how they incorporated their magic and how much thought they put into it to, you know, have some morality around it, I think you'd be really impressed and amazed at what they did. But what I want to tell you is let me ask you this. What is the most common way that Jesus taught people during his earthly ministry? The correct answer is he taught through parables mostly. And what are parables? Parables are made up stories that convey a deeper and very real truth. Now, why did Jesus speak in parables and not, in plain English? Well, Jesus has some answers for that, but I also want to throw in maybe another little piece to consider. The piece to consider would be that sometimes I think a story can more clearly and more profoundly convey truth than if you were to say it outright. That is because we relate with stories on a different level. It's more of an emotional and a tangible way. What I mean by that is someone might tell you it is not good to steal. But if someone tells you a story where a man is going to steal bread because he's trying to feed his family, and as he's going to steal the bread, he's running along and he sees another man on the side of the road who is emaciated. He hasn't eaten anything in days. And this man is sitting there begging for food. And maybe he's even down there saying, "Hey, I'm willing to work for food, just for a scrap of food. I'm willing to work." The man who was then going to steal to provide for his family, he sees this other man on the side of the road with more honor and more dignity than he, despite the fact that he might be emaciated and begging on the side of the road, because he has not lost his morality yet. And so, what I mean is that by telling this story about do not steal, you see the human element. You see the conviction of this man seeing someone else in a worse off condition doing better than he is. And sometimes that story just carries more weight and it's easier to remember than if I were to just tell you something outright. And so that is why I believe stories have so much power. Now, just to be thorough, let me read through Jesus and his response on why he teaches in parables. So in Matthew chapter 13, verse 10 through 13, it says, "And the disciples came to him and said, 'Why do you speak to them in parables?' He," this is Jesus, "answered and said to them, 'Because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand.'" So as you can see, Jesus has his own reason for teaching in parables. Some of it, I think, is because of the hardness of heart of the people around them. Some of it, I think, is because when it's taught in a parable, you have to study it more. You have to understand what it means. It's not quite as clear as day. Now, thankfully, a lot of times Jesus does explain his parables, which is helpful. But parables are a useful tool, and so are stories, and so is fantasy. So I hope that we'll just kind of keep all that in mind, especially if you are a little bit against fantasy or fiction being used in this context. Now, there's one other piece that we may cover on this channel in the future, and I'm excited to mention it publicly, mostly because it may start holding me accountable to actually having to work on it and finish it. And that is that I have been working on my own fantasy story for many years now, for almost 8 to be exact. And I am not ready to share a whole lot of public details. I'm not going to share the name or plots or my races or, the places I've made. And some of that's my own paranoia, just in the modern world of the internet. It feels like you could put your ideas out there and someone could take them, especially if you're not done yet, and especially in something like fantasy where it might take you 10, 15 years to put something together. Now, that said, at some point, I do plan to discuss it on this channel, talk about my world building and what all that looks like. I don't know when that'll be. That could be another decade from now, for all I know. But just know that at some point, that is coming. And that I am so interested in all this stuff for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons is because I am trying to build a fantasy world myself. And I personally believe that one of the things God has gifted me with is creativity. My whole life, I've been interested in things like music and stories and, writing. I've even started to dabble with pixel art, and I like creating things. I know that I get that from my creator. Now, we all like to create in some capacity, so I don't want to act like I'm unique in that. I think sometimes artists, they act like there's something special, like, that they have this unique gift of creativity. But the reality is we're all creative in different ways. The plumber who installs your toilet is creative, and he knows how to put it in properly and the right materials to use and the exact angles to put them in at. Like it's still creative. Or the teacher who puts together a curriculum for their students, that takes creativity. We all create, we just do it differently. And we do that because, as Tolkien says, we are sub creators, meaning that God has made the heavens and the earth, and he has made all this raw material that we get to work with. So God spoke things out of nothing into existence. We as humans, we take everything God has made and we create stuff out of that. For example, with Tolkien, elves and dwarves and ents and orcs, they're all super cool creatures, but Tolkien, at the end of the day, would fully admit that he has basically just made different versions of humans. They're all humanoid creatures. It's an ent is a human who's a tree. An orc is a human who's ugly, and elves and dwarves, etc. That is sub creation because we cannot actually create nothing, or we cannot create something out of nothing. Only God does that. And so I I want to use my creativity in whatever way I can to honor God, and maybe in the process, if God will use me, to take those ideas, take my creativity, and use it to bring other people closer to Him, and maybe even reach people who are lost and bring them to help point them to Jesus for the very first time. That is my hope. So I know that's a lot to cover. Thank you for bearing with me. There's so much more to cover. I look forward to going over this stuff in the future. But I hope that you're excited about this. I'm really excited. I think this is going to be a cool new direction for the channel. It's going to help us so much just have an identity for what we're doing here. So if you're excited about this, please leave a comment down below. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts. And hey, even if you're a little angry with me for changing the channel, you can leave your thoughts down below too. It's okay. I've been doing YouTube now for 2.5 years, including my other channel, and I'm slowly developing a thicker skin. So come at me. Anyway, thank you guys so much for your time. God bless, and we'll see you soon. Adios.